The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. Those were the famous words of the late Franklin D. Roosevelt. Yeah, that was a freaking lie. Welcome to Archive, my name is Starks, and today we're talking about
Resident Evil.
And let me tell you, fear isn't the only thing I'm afraid of in this game. Zombies, more zombies, bigger zombies, and a large girl. This game is honestly giving me more anxiety than any game in the franchise so far. In a very good way, of course. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of the spooky stuff, let's talk about the story and the background for a bit. Created by Capcom in 2026, this is the 9th installment of the popular Resident Evil series. And let me tell you, even after 9 mainline games and a lot of spin-offs, they still know exactly what makes this series work. Except Resident Evil 6, but we don't talk about that one. Requiem is what I can only describe as the culmination of 30 years of Resident Evil. It takes elements from previous games and blend them together, but not in a messy way. The developers clearly knew how much time to give each aspect of the game. So what is the game about? Well, in Requiem we play as a fresh new face in the series, Grace Ashcroft, the daughter of Alyssa Ashcroft, a main character from Resident Evil Outbreak and Outbreak 2. Grace is a timid and shy woman in her 20s who works for the FBI. She is tasked with investigating a series of strange deaths appearing all over the country, people dying while seemingly infected with weird black markings covering their body. Her investigations eventually lead to her being kidnapped, forcing her to fight for survival in a zombie-infested care center. However, she isn't the only protagonist of the story. The spotlight is shared with a familiar face, a man of renown, loved by the fans everywhere, the one, the only, Leon Kennedy. It's good to see you back, buddy. You may be pushing 50, but you're still going strong. Leon is also investigating the strange deaths, or more specifically the mysterious black markings. Something we discover very early on is that Leon himself is infected with them. Normally, the only difference between the protagonists you play and the previous games is some story beats, weapons, and supporting characters. In Requiem, Grace's sections lean heavily more into stealth and survival horror, while Leon's gameplay is much more action-oriented. And this duality works extremely well in my opinion. The sections where you play as Grace never feel too long or dragged out, and neither does Leon's. Leon's action sequences serve as a perfect contrast to Grace's, and when you're playing as Grace you feel helpless most of the time, constantly hiding, sneaking and barely surviving encounters. But Leon has been through this kind of crap before. At this point, killing zombies is basically like doing his taxes. He doesn't want to do it, but it's inevitable. So after barely surviving a zombie encounter as Grace, it's incredibly satisfying to switch over to Leon and start hatching zombies into minced meat, tension and release. Now, switching between characters is tied directly into the story, so unlike previous games in the series, you don't choose who to play as at the beginning of the game. Instead, you swap between Leon and Grace as the story progresses. I remember that when I saw the trailers for Requiem, I was honestly worried. I was afraid that they would try to do two things at once but not succeed at either of them. But as I said before, they do a surprisingly good job in making both styles feel distinct, while the switch between them feels completely natural. Let's start with Grace, because her side of the game is where Requiem leans heavily into its survival horror roots, seen in Resident Evil 1 and 2 as well as 7 and 8. Inventory management, resource management, puzzles and exploration, all of this just screams classic Resident Evil. Grace is about exploring the care center she's been brought to and trying to find a way to leave, while also figuring out what the hell is going on, as she is seemingly very vital to whatever the villain is plotting. Her inventory is limited to only a few slots, so you have to keep tabs on what you want to bring and what you want to save in order to limit your backtracking. And while the game is fairly generous in giving you resources, it is recommended to sneak, to stealth, to not kill everything you see, as some enemies are tougher than you think and you don't have a lot in the way of weapon variety or firepower. What helps with this is the new kind of zombie that this game introduces. They are still technically your basic zombie, the flesh-eating ones, but with an extra twist. They keep the habits they had when they were alive. Some clean stains off the floor, some trying to cook food, and some just wander around turning off the lights. I'm actually a big fan of this new kind of zombies because it makes you feel smart trying to avoid them. You watch and analyze what they do, what their habits are, and avoid them that way. But it also adds a bit of an existential horror twist to it, how much of the original mind is still left in a zombie. They still retain some of their memories while doing these habits almost obsessively, and that is horrifying. It's almost like they're trapped inside bodies they no longer can control. However, if you do want to shoot zombies but you're low on ammo, there is a crafting system. After you find the blood collector, you can craft items using blood you suck up from dead enemies or random buckets spread across the care center. Blood seems to be the new theme of the game, as you will see a lot of it. You can even make bullets out of it, and I have no clue how, since there's no gunpowder involved. It's just scrap and blood, so blood bullets, blood healing. German would be proud. Any item you go past but do not pick up will show up on your map, so you can always go back and pick them up whenever you want. The game, however, does not tell you if an area has been fully explored or looted or not. This is a bummer to me, as I loved the old green means looted, red means not looted mechanic, but I guess I manage. Overall, I do actually like Grace quite a bit. Some people might get annoyed that she's a bit shy and not very strong, but I do like that aspect about her, that she's more human than Leon or Chris or Jill. She is someone who is experiencing this for the first time ever, almost like Ethan was in the Resident Evil 7. But Leon solves problems a little differently. Leon is very much action focused, lots of inventory space, plenty of ammo, plenty of enemies, and loads of weapons. He is clearly leaning more towards the other Resident Evil formula, the one from Resident Evil 4, 5, and 6. The action formula, the one where you make your way through the story one bullet at a time, or multiple bullets at a time rather. He's a veteran after all, so it only makes sense that he wouldn't sneak around. He'd give the zombies a roundhouse kick before cutting their heads off with an axe. He is also moving through basically the same area as Grace, just with more guns and at a much faster pace. Later on you do get into more Leon-specific areas, where the game almost feels more like the mercenary mode from the previous games, something this game lacks at the moment, which is a shame if you're a fan of that mode. I wish there were more I could say about Leon's part though, but he is very straightforward. You run, you shoot, and you loot. Rinse and repeat, but the action is consistent in making you sure you don't get bored, as it is always moving. Resident Evil has often been split into two different kinds of horror, the action and the survival horror, and this game is a tribute to both by blending them together in a beautiful experience. Early on in the game you get to choose if you want to play first person or third person with your characters, with the default being first person for Grace and third for Leon. I was switching between the two at the beginning, trying to figure out which one I liked more, but in the end I did settle for the recommended setting, and I think that is the best way to play it. First person makes Grace's sections scarier, as you can only see what she sees, and it makes you feel more invested into not dying. While playing third person as Leon is perfect for the action, it fits the gameplay very well, as it reminds you of Resident Evil 4, and you get to see Leon in all his glory at all times, which is a huge plus. But mechanics and gameplay aside, we should probably talk about the actual horror, as it is still a horror game. I mentioned at the start of the video that this game actually gave me a bit of anxiety, or rather a lot of it. And most of that comes from the fear of being hunted. Grace is someone completely new to this kind of nightmare, and the game does a fantastic job of making the player feel that same fear. I mentioned before how the zombies in this game act a bit different than we are used to, and the existentialism that it brings. Most Resident Evil games aren't actually that scary once you get used to them. The horror usually comes from the survival element, the constant struggle to not die. The only games in the series that have genuinely scared me are 7 and Requiem, and both of those games put you in the shoes of someone who is completely out of their depth. But, just like in most Resident Evil games, that fear slowly fades the more you play. Both you and Grace grow more confident as the story progresses. There is, however, one thing in this game that still freaks me out every time I see it. And yes, it's the large girl. This creepy stalker is the Mr. X of this game. She is creepy and an obstacle in your path from the get-go. And yes, she is a bit of a typical stalker kind of enemy, one that is a reoccurring kind in the series. The kind that roams an area that you want to explore but that you don't want to mess with. She is, however, unique in a few ways. As previously mentioned, she's right there from the beginning, not slowly getting you into it, not waiting until you feel confident. She is there and ready to bite your head off from the start. And unlike the others in the previous games, this one can climb. She crawls through holes, she comes down from the ceiling. You never really know where she might appear, but you can occasionally guess from where. She is, however, very sensitive to light. So be like a kid and turn on every light you can find. In the end, these are all things we've seen in previous Resident Evil games. It doesn't do a lot of new things that stand out, apart from switching between survival horror and action horror. This game doesn't have to be something new and revolutionary, it takes what I consider the best part of the series and sort of mashes them together in a way that works. It's a love letter to itself in a way. Is it a perfect 10 out of 10 game? No, not really, there are a few things I'm not too fond of. The care center is very blatantly trying to be a bit of a nostalgia bait for people who have played previous games, because the care center does resemble previous Resident Evil areas very vividly. It's smaller, with slightly less areas, but it is reminding me of Raccoon City Police Department. And while the enemies make up for it with how they behave around the area, I did start to feel a bit bored after a while. You do get to more areas later on, but I still think they could have made the care center itself feel more unique. Most of the areas does feel a bit samey. And while I praise the game for switching between different gameplay styles, it leans very heavily towards Grace in the first few hours, which made Leon's early sections feel a bit short. Even though he gets more time to shine later on, it's just something I noticed, and personally I think I prefer Grace's part. Even though both parts are fun, I am more of a fan of the survival horror aspect of Resident Evil rather than the action one, even though Resident Evil 4 is a personal favorite of mine. Requiem also feel a bit more linear than I would have liked. I'm not asking for an open world game, I don't think that would work for this franchise, but I do wish it had a little bit more exploration. There are few optional places you can visit, but they're often limited to small rooms or areas and nothing extravagant. And then, of course, the no explored area indicators of the map thing that doesn't exist in this game. I really wish it would come back because I am a fan of that feature, but I guess what they have right now works as well. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Resident Evil 9 Requiem. It's a faithful tribute and continuation of an already beloved series. Some might say that it has a bit of an identity crisis, but I personally say that its identity is to be a culmination of what makes Resident Evil what it is. And I'm having a great time with it, despite the few nitpicks that I have. It's definitely what I hoped it would be, and I am pleasantly surprised by some of the things it does. For once, the horror actually works, and it's generally scary with a good mix of action in between. And in the end, if you like the previous games in the series, especially Resident Evil 7 and Resident Evil 4, then I 100% recommend this game, you will not regret it. But that's all from me today. Do you agree with me? If not, then let me know down in the comments below. And while you're down there, make sure to like and subscribe. And remember, be good, be nerdy. I've been Sarex. See you next time.